This Passover will forever be known in the Weissman family as the year that our 7-year-old son schooled his mother, the rabbi, in Torah. There we were, following the commandment of the Seder to tell the story of the Exodus and quizzing my son Maverick to see what he could remember. He was doing fine, recounting how baby Moses was saved from the Nile, how he later encountered God at the burning bush, how he went to tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Then we got to the plagues. And Mav says, very casually, so then a giant frog came, and they hit the frog, and it exploded into a million little frogs. Now, I've read the book of Exodus more than a few times, and I don't recall ever encountering a giant exploding frog. But it does sound exactly like something a 7-year-old boy might make up, like my son's belief that the tooth fairy takes all the children's teeth and builds a castle out of them. So we pressed him, asking where he learned that particular fact about the Exodus story. In Sunday school, he replied with perfect confidence. And before I began to panic about what my child was actually learning in Beth Am's youth education program, I realized I did have a vague recollection of something strange about one verse in the story in Exodus. So I opened my Chumash, my Torah, to check. In chapter 7, God tells Moses and Aaron to warn Pharaoh about the second plague, the plague of the frogs. Moses and Aaron do what they're told, and then God commands Aaron to hold his staff over the river to make the frogs come up out of the water. Every time the word for frogs, tzfardim, is in the plural. But when the miracle actually happens, we read, Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frog came up and covered the land of Egypt. Just one tzfardeia comes up and covers the land. So we found our giant frog. But there is no explosion in the book of Exodus, so I had to look deeper. The next day, I went searching for the exploding frog. First, I found a discussion in the Talmud that addressed the mysterious use of the singular tzfardeia. This is what it says. This matter is subject to a dispute between Tanaim, early rabbis. Rabbi Akiva says it was one frog, and it spawned and filled the entire land of Egypt with frogs. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said to him, Akiva, what are you doing occupying yourself with the study of Agadah, that is non-legal material? That's not your field of expertise. Take your statements to the obscure legal tractates of Negaim and Oholot. Rather, the verse is to be understood as follows. It was one frog, it whistled to the other frogs, and they all came after it. So I found a whistling frog, but still no exploding frog. Finally, I hit the jackpot. Rashi, the great 11th century Torah scholar, says this about our verse. Really, there was only one frog, but when they struck at it, it was split into many swarms. This is a midrashic explanation of the usage of the singular noun here. My son wasn't making it up. I must give a shout out to his teachers, Renee and Jason Hart, for working Rashi into the first grade Sunday school curriculum and giving my son an interpretation of the story that he got to teach me and the rest of the participants around our Seder table. I will never live this down. I tell you this story as an example of the genius of our ancestors, not the genius of my son, that goes without saying, who created the ritual of the Seder. Central to our observance is the obligation to take a story we know so well and to retell it every year, challenging ourselves to find something new in it every time. And one key to finding something new is to engage children in the Seder. From the beginning, the Seder was envisioned as a teaching tool, a way of piquing the interest of the children, inviting and encouraging them to ask questions, and allowing us the opportunity to make meaning with them. That's why the youngest in attendance is supposed to chant the 4 questions, and why the Haggadah insists that we are to explain to our children 4 times and in 4 different ways what this holiday is all about. As you may have recited at your Seders this week, The Haggadah imagines 4 different types of children that we are to engage with during the Seder. The wise child asks, "What are these testimonies, statutes, and judgments that the eternal our God commanded you?" To the wise child, you give information, instructions for how to observe the holiday, preparing her and empowering her to observe the holiday for herself. The wicked child asks, "What is this worship to you?" To him you say, "For the sake of this did the Eternal do for me in my going out of Egypt. For me and not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been saved." Notice that the parent's answer is a rebuke for the wicked child's separating himself from the community, but is not a rejection of him. Even the wicked child has a place at the table, and even the wicked child gets to ask challenging questions and receive answers to them. The simple child asks, "What is this?" And you answer him simply, "With the strength of God's hand did the Eternal take us out from Egypt, from the house of slaves." And to the child who doesn't know how to ask any questions at all, you explain, "For the sake of this did the Eternal do for me in my going out of Egypt." To the one who doesn't even know how or what to ask, we start with the personal, saying, "This is what God did for me in my going out from Egypt." In other words, this is what Passover means to me personally. The 4 children invite us to think about different ways of understanding and explaining the story of Passover. For those of us who don't have children at our Seders, don't despair. The halakha, Jewish law, says that a man's son should ask him questions, but if he has no son, his wife should ask him. If he does not even have a wife, he should ask himself. The law goes on to say that even if 2 Torah scholars who know the story and rituals of Passover very well are sitting together at a Seder, they are supposed to ask each other questions. In a sense, everyone is meant to view the story of Passover through the eyes of a child, either a real live child or an imagined one. And when we see the story through their eyes, we learn something new. So for those of you who are going to be attending Seders this weekend, or who are already planning for next year, don't forget to honor the children's questions and perspectives. If there aren't any children in attendance, designate at least one adult who is young at heart to represent their point of view. You just never know what you'll uncover about this very old, well-known story when you read it with new eyes. In my case, I discovered an exploding frog. Shabbat shalom, Chag Sameach.
Shabbat shalom.